Hey, it's Ed. Before we start, I want to thank Christine Huber for becoming a podcast supporter. If you go to mountaineerprairie.com/support, you can see a very long list of everybody who has generously decided to support the podcast. And it really means a lot to me. And from a more practical standpoint, it's given me the funds to do some really cool side projects around the podcast, like starting the Mountain and Prairie store that you can get to on the website. It helped fund the live podcast in Bozeman last year and was going to fund some live podcasts this summer, but we all know what happened there. But it's very, very helpful. It is greatly appreciated. It's not expected. Podcast is free and will always be free. But for anyone who wants to learn more about that, you can go to mountaineerprairie.com/support. Second thing, I have started a email newsletter that comes out every single Wednesday, and it's called Good News from the American West, and it is only good news, good things that are happening here in the West. Through my job in conservation and my job on this podcast, I'm constantly exposed to really good news and inspiring news that is usually at odds with what I see on the internet and what I see on regular news outlets, which is mostly gloom and doom. And so I thought people could use a dose of good news. So if you can, go to mountaineerprairie.com/good news and you can sign up. It comes out every Wednesday. No spam, no funny business of any kind, just a few bullet points of interesting articles that I think you will find inspiring. I appreciate everybody who's already signed up. And again, go to mountaineerprairie.com/good news if you want to learn more. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Becky Edwards. Becky is the executive director of the Mountain Mamas, an organization whose mission is to amplify women's voices into a movement to ensure that kids grow up in a healthy climate with clean air and access to public lands. Operating out of both Montana and Colorado, and currently expanding throughout the West, the Mountain Mamas harness the power of mothers to advocate to solve some of the West's most pressing conservation and environmental challenges. Whether helping to garner support for the recently passed Great American Outdoors Act or fighting for clean water in our Rocky Mountain rivers, the Mountain Mamas have become a formidable force for good in the West. Becky grew up in Iowa but moved west to pursue her passion for climbing and mountaineering. After many years of being single-mindedly focused on life high in the big mountains, her priorities drastically shifted with the birth of her daughter. No longer was she focused on big ascents, but rather on making the world a better place for her little girl. And it's worth noting that Becky's early years of motherhood were no walk in the park. She spent many years as a single mother, while simultaneously starting several successful businesses as well as the Mountain Mamas. But despite all the challenges, Becky never gave up and has managed to build an impactful movement that is spreading across the West. We caught up via Skype the day after the House of Representatives passed the Great American Outdoors Act. So we started out talking about that victory and its impacts on conservation and recreation. Becky is very gifted at explaining complex legislative jargon, so she graciously and entertainingly walks me through many of the details around the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the importance of its permanent funding, and more. We discussed the importance of advocacy work with elected officials, and she offers up some practical advice for anyone who wants to become more involved in guiding their elected officials on important issues. We also discuss her journey as a mother, as well as her journey as a woman in the conservation sector. And finally, we talk about the need for more diversity in conservation and why now is a wonderful opportunity for positive change. This was an amazing conversation. I think you'll find it equal parts educational, inspiring, and empowering. Hope you enjoy. But maybe just to set the stage, could you talk about the Mountain Mamas and just really explain what the organization is, and then we can talk about how it came to be. But what do you guys do?
Well, the Mountain Mamas, our mission is to elevate, inspire, and hopefully encourage women to advocate for the places that they love. And, we really work on ensuring that our kids and the next generation have clean, healthy water to drink, play, fish in, clean air to breathe, and access to our public lands all over the nation. But obviously, we're focused here in the Mountain West, and it's just part of our way of life here. So our goal with the Mamas is to, make sure that our outdoor quality of life stays intact and thriving for many generations to come.
And so how did the organization come to be? I mean, what's the background on it?
Well, and the organization as it is today, we're comprised of two states. We just recently merged with a great group in Colorado, formerly Colorado Moms Know Best. In Montana, we started in probably 2012. I was kind of kicking around this idea with a couple other friends. I was a relatively new mom. My daughter was 2 at the time, and I was a climber. I had done a lot of mountaineering for a lot of years before I had her, and was really kind of struggling with, oh my God, I'm a parent. I can't go out on month-long expeditions anymore. I've got this kiddo. And when I became a parent, my worldview really shifted, and it became less about me and it became all about her. And so the Mamas really started as this unorganized, loose group of gals that got together virtually, sometimes in person, around our shared outdoor quality of life. And really that boiled down to what baby carrier doesn't chafe your hips, and what mountain bike trails are dry that I could maybe pull my chariot on for a couple miles. Do you want to get together to go backcountry skiing? And so that's really how it started, and really has just grown from there. And it started here in Montana, virtually. We had a website, we had some social media channels, got together for a few events here and there. And then over time, it became really apparent to us that, again, especially with that shift after you have kids, it becomes less about you, more about them. And how do we make sure that these kids can have these experiences for generations so that we can take our grandkids out, camping, hunting, hiking, fishing in these same spots. And so it really became apparent that we needed to do what we could, use the power that we have to advocate for those wild outdoor spaces. So we kind of slowly started stepping into some advocacy work. And our first project, our first issue, was the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that just yesterday has been rolled into Great American Outdoors Act, which combines both full dedicated funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund with parks maintenance funding to make sure that our national parks are given adequate funding to do needed, restroom, road, just general infrastructure maintenance. And that all just passed through the House of Representatives yesterday. So it was a pretty big day, and we're tickled about that and hope that the president will sign it here in the next few days, and we'll be able to check that very big win box. We're very excited about it.
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. I mean, obviously you still need to get the president's signature, but man, what just years and years and years of work. One thing that I thought might be helpful, because I think it was helpful for me, because a lot of my work, I'm deeply embedded in the conservation world, but most of my work is private land conservation, and which, goes hand in hand with a lot of the public stuff. But I bet that there are a lot of people listening to this that have heard about the Land and Water Conservation Fund and heard about this big victory, but don't really fully understand what it is. Can you give us just kind of a primer on what is the Land and Water Conservation Fund? Yeah,
it's an acronym. That's what it is. It is a wonky thing. So Land and Water Conservation Fund started in, I believe, 1964 was the original legislation, or maybe 65. It was right around in there, is a way to reinvest offshore oil and gas revenues back into conservation and recreation projects on U.S. soil. And so how that precipitates is if you have left your home, you have probably interacted with an LWCF site, especially really nationwide. In Montana, we are very big recipients of LWCF. There are two different sides of LWCF. There's a state side, which funds neighborhood parks, city parks, trails, playgrounds, swimming pools, ball fields, just a gamut of things and places that we go every day, especially with the mamas with our kids. My daughters all play soccer. My oldest daughter's a swimmer. And so every day we're at an LWCF funded site. And most people have no idea. They think that their communities or their counties or their states, created these parks, and they have, but they are funded through this program. And then the federal side of things are for, land acquisition projects. And in Montana, especially, they do a lot of investing in generational ranches. And that is through conservation easements. So that's really enabled a lot of families in Montana to be able to stay on their ranches, be productive on their ranches, have an additional revenue stream, add some additional wildlife protections, and, really be able to stay on those properties long term. And so, through conservation easements on generational ranches, they do a lot of land acquisition for fishing access sites in Montana, and I know a lot of other states. Most of our fishing access sites are resultant of LWCF investment. And so it's a wonky acronym, but it really boils down to every day, if you're on a trail, if you're in a park, if you're on the river, chances are LWCF has enabled that experience for you. And we really didn't get a lot of understanding about the program until we really broke it down into those simple terms. If your kid plays soccer, chances are LWCF has benefited you.
And I was on your website the other day looking around, and there was this really cool link that allowed me to go and see all of the projects that is funded, like in Colorado, and I could see in my county and here El Paso County in Colorado. And you're exactly right. Like the place where my daughter does her soccer lessons got money from that maybe like the 70s or 80s or something like that. And so, I mean, and there's a long, long list. All these different places I go on a weekly or at least a monthly basis have benefited from that. So one more question about that. When this new legislation that will hopefully be signed, it says that it will fully fund the LWCF. And so it says it'll fully fund it. And what does that mean? What does that mean if you're not in that world?
Great question. Again, a lot of legislative talk here. I'm sorry for the acronyms, but
no, I love it.
Basically, to back up just a fuzz. So for the past 10 years, I've been working on LWCF. And the program, prior to February of 2019, the program runs off of reauthorizations and investment through the appropriations process. And so what that basically means for the regular folks who don't watch C-SPAN is that every year, not necessarily every year for the reauthorization, usually they would reauthorize the program in like bulk year chunks. So, I think the first initial authorization of the program was about 25 years. But basically, it just means that the program exists. So that's the reauthorization part of it, that the program can continue to exist. And so in February of 2019, we passed the John Dingell Act, which basically then permanently reauthorizes the program to exist. And that basically just means it will be there in perpetuity. So it can never be taken away. However, at that same time, we were not able to pass funding for it. So the way I would explain it always is that you had this great new car and it's sitting in your driveway, but you can't drive it because you don't have any gas in it. And so that is where the funding part comes in. And again, prior to, right now, whenever the president signs a legislation, we had to go through the appropriations process annually to fight for those dollars. And the appropriations process is basically, Congress divvying up the piggy bank. And so when those funds come in from offshore oil and gas exploration and revenue, they sit in a piggy bank. And the original way that the LWCF bill was written back in 1965 was that the program was able to be authorized and funded up to $900 million annually, so each year. Only once in the 50-some years since the program was originally passed has it been funded at the $900 million level that they had hoped when they originally wrote the legislation. Because what happens during the appropriations process is that there's lots of other priorities with the government. We all know there's lots of things to pay for. And so they would, kind of use that LWCF dollars as a piggy bank for other priorities. And so what is being passed right now is that we will be receiving that $900 million every year. So that's huge. We don't have to fight for it every year like we've had to in the past. So that means more trails, more playgrounds, more parks. That means that those funds are going to be there when we need them for projects. So it's a very big deal. People don't understand it a lot of times, and I completely get that. But again, if you can think about it in terms of, do you like to play soccer? Do you like to trail run? Do you like to bird watch? Do you like to fish? Do you like to get in your river? You'll have more opportunities because this program isn't going to go anywhere, and it's going to receive the funding that it has always been supposed to.
That was a great explanation. I should have talked to you like last year when I was trying to fully get my head around what it meant, because I've read so many articles and just, really trying to, but that was the best explanation that I've heard. And I think that the fact that it's fully funded and that these organizations aren't going to have to go out and fight for that money every year. It's almost like these politicians that have to run for re-election every 2 years or something, and all they're doing is running for re-election. They're not actually ever doing anything. And, you think about all the resources that these conservation groups have to devote to lobbying and fighting for this money, and now they can actually do conservation work. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Earlier today, we had a call with the National Coalition for Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we were all joking around saying, what are we going to do with our time now? And one of my colleagues here in Montana, Glenn Marks, said, we're actually going to do what we've been supposed to be doing for the past decade, which is, implementing these great projects that we've been fighting for those dollars for. So I am excited about that. But yeah, it's been a long road, and so many people, organizations, individuals, communities, mayors, governors have advocated for this program, and everybody deserves a pat on the back. It's a very big deal.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that kind of leads me to my next question for you, because I'm pretty engaged with things, and I try to be educated, and I'm pretty curious on things. But up until about a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago, I didn't fully understand or appreciate the power of not lobbying as much as advocating and going, best case, going to DC and talking to representatives and senators and their staffs, or making calls. I thought a lot of that was kind of window dressing, and maybe it didn't matter. And that's kind of a cynical way of looking at it. And then I went and did it, and I left very inspired by the process. I mean, it's obviously frustrating in some ways, but overall, I got the feeling that this kind of lobbying may not be the right word, advocating has power, and you can make things happen. And that's obviously a big part of what you've been doing. Can you talk about that process of maybe specifically to this project? What did that look like when you're going to DC? Because I think a lot of people, I was one of them, you hear about call your senator, call your representative, go to DC and talk to these people. But most people never do that. Most people don't even know what that means. So talk about that process, maybe the nuts and bolts of what you were doing, and then how it played out and how it worked and the power of doing that. Yeah.
Well, I would just start with, I completely understand your point of view. And I mean, even with my own family, I will. I just spoke to my brother this morning. It's my brother's birthday. Happy birthday, Bruce. He and I don't always see eye to eye politically, but he sent me a really sweet text yesterday, and he said, "I am so proud of you and everyone else that was so determined with your bill, with your outdoors bill." And he doesn't even know really what it is in its entirety, but people think that their voice doesn't matter. We have a huge country. There are so many people that live in our country and our nation. And I live in a state where typically my vote for our president is not reflected and where we end up going, where our electoral college votes go. And so I think a lot of people in my situation sometimes thinks that our votes don't matter, that our voices don't matter. And I cannot say enough. That is wrong. Mm-hmm. Every single person's voice matters. And that has been, when we started the Mountain Mamas, two of the things that women continually tell me about why they're not engaged with issues in their community that are important to them, that are important to their kids, that are important to their way of life, is that they don't feel like they know enough and they don't have time and they don't feel like, their voice matters. Your voice matters. So with this legislation with Land and Water Conservation Fund, which, we've been working on since the Mamas started, there is incredible power in all of those little steps that you just laid out. And it's all of those steps pulled together make a very large voice. If you're a delegation member, staffer, and you're getting, 10, 20, 100, 200, 500 phone calls, emails every day, every week, asking for one certain thing, they're going to pay attention. And so your one phone call adds up. Your one email adds up. Your name signing onto a petition adds up. And so, what we did with through the Mamas, and again with a lot of other great organizations to really see this over the finish line, was pushing all of that, pulling together petitions, having women sign it, sending those off to our elected official staff, getting women to travel to Washington, D.C. to go meet with their delegation members and their staff. And you don't have to be an expert either. You just have to talk from your experience. We had a gal that I took in October, wonderful, wonderful woman. She lives in Miles City in Montana, which is way out in eastern Montana. And she's a hunter. She's a big public lands advocate. And we were leaving a member's office, and this is probably my favorite story from DC. And, often they're busy. People are in and out. We weren't able to meet with this particular member's chief of staff. And he had caught wind somewhere that we had a gal there from Miles City. So we're walking down the hall after we had left the meeting, and he throws the door open, comes running after us down the hallway because he wanted to meet this woman from Miles City that came all the way out to Washington, D.C. to talk about LWCF. And so your voice matters.
Yeah, it does. I mean, just anecdotally, when I was there and sitting in the waiting areas, waiting to talk to people, I would see the staff members answering the phones. And obviously some of them were pleasant conversations. Some of them you could tell they were getting chewed out, but they were diligently taking notes on every call and entering into some sort of system. And it's not just calling and leaving a message on the answer machine. There are people there. And it's really pretty cool to see how it all works out. So for people who have never done that, and that was me up until 2 years ago, what's your advice for talking, whether let's say, first of all, in person, like if you somehow get to DC and talking to these people, what's your advice for how to do it? Like what's some practical advice about you're meeting with this person? This is how you should approach it.
Sure. Again, you don't have to be the expert. So that is my main point of advice. You don't have to be the expert. You just have to talk out of your experience. What is important to you? Whether it's your business, whether it's your family, whether it's your neighbors, whatever that is, however you relate to the issue or the legislation or the situation that you're there to talk to them about, give them your personal experience. That is where we're most eloquent, where we're most passionate, where we can connect with people the most is when we tell our story. And I tell that time and time again to women, you have to tell your story. And your story is not right or wrong. Your story is your story. And they will find connection in that. And if you're talking, authentically from your heart, you're going to get a much more impassioned and empathetic ear than if you're just listing a sheet of bullet points. So tell your story. There's, again, an issue like LWCF, like I said, the tentacles they're so far reaching from our economy to our way of life and what we do after work. And so there are so many different stories, beautiful stories to tell about that legislation. we did the campaign for years and years. And I always felt like every day I learned a little bit of something different, because everybody had a different experience with those dollars and how they impacted their communities.
Yeah, I think that part about not having to be an expert is key, because in my experience, start talking about, we were trying to do something about conservation easement abuse, and they were these kind of low life developer types were abusing the tax code with conservation easements. But you go in there and you start talking about conservation easements, and it's clear that the people you're talking to don't even know really what that means. They may have heard the term. And so, just by if you care enough to show up, odds are you know a lot more than they do. And so they see it as a learning opportunity, most of them, if they're the good people, and they want to learn and they're interested, and especially on something like conservation. I mean, I was in Cory Gardner's office, and then I was in Senator Bennett's office, and those guys don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but they are both interested in trying to push forward conservation, and, maybe through different methods, but it's a pretty, if you got to pick a issue to go into any senator's office, conservation's a pretty good one. You can find common ground with most people with that.
Oh yeah, I have a really dear philanthropist friend who, we probably have never voted in consort on anything in our entire lives, and his quote to me always is, "Conservation is the bridge," and that's where we find the commonality. Even if you're, it's been so interesting during this COVID pandemic and our restrictions with, how do we live our daily lives? And it only reaffirmed my suspicion, which is we connect through those shared public spaces outside. We see these folks in downtown New York City, masking up and making the trek to Central Park, or just sitting outside on their balconies, getting some fresh air, going to those public spaces, in the thick of the pandemic when everything was shut down here in Montana. And I know you have kids and I have kids, and you've got to leave home sometime if you have kids for your mental health. And those were my release valves every single day. We live right downtown here in Bozeman, and we've got a great park across the street and a great trail system. And I would get those riding shoes on, and that hour was mine. And that would be the opportunity for me to see people, to, wave at people from a safe distance. And the uptick that we have seen in public lands and waters since the COVID crisis is huge. People, those are the safe places that we're able to get out to, and to get that physical, mental health and well-being, and find that connection. And, we're hard pressed to find somebody that we can't find some commonality with as it relates to the outdoors. And, and I don't care so much how you're recreating, how you're moving through that landscape. You're moving through the landscape. I don't care if you're on a motorcycle or on backcountry skis or on a skateboard or on foot or whatever. We're out there because we share that love of that experience. And so, if you can focus on that, you can make a lot of headway.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think I've said it on the podcast before, but I think issues like this, funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and then just the general threats to public lands that have been going on over the last 3.5 years, it's caused a lot of these groups that maybe used not to get along, like motorcycles and hikers or whatever, that they're all on the same team now, and they realize that they can be on the same team. And I think that this legislation that's getting ready to be signed is a perfect example of 3.5 years of all these groups that maybe used to be kind of fractured coming together, getting behind something that, as a group. And it shows how these numbers, they're such powers in numbers if we can combine. And so I think it's super inspiring in the middle of a not so inspiring time.
Definitely. There's so I'm working on a piece of legislation here in Montana called the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act. And it's a very small, it's a large landscape style piece of legislation. But I love the local spokespeople, the local steering committee members that got this off the ground. There's a fellow that runs Pyramid Mountain Lumber in Sealy Lake, and he always says that the area of commonality is so much larger than you give it credit for. And he's so right. And just the way our Congress works these days, it's real hard to get any kind of legislation even through those preliminary checkpoints and hurdles, unless you've got broad support. And especially in conservation bills these days, you've got to have the support of mountain bikers and the ATV community and conservationists and wildlife advocates, and because of those increased hurdles, it has forced us to figure out ways to work together. And I think we're the better for it, even though it's definitely a longer process on the ground, doing a lot of vetting and all that legwork. But, we're seeing the last couple of years, I've seen, with the John D. Dingell legislation and then the Great American Outdoors Act, we're certainly seeing that conservation is that bridge, and these bipartisan efforts by huge, 3-1 yesterday was the vote count. It was 301 to, I forget what, 100 and something in the House. I mean, that's a big spread. There's, 80 some Republicans that signed on to that vote. So that's telling. We're figuring out how to work together. I've got hope that we can keep doing that.
Yeah, it gives me hope. And I think I come off on this podcast as being like super enthusiastic and optimistic, but I don't know that that's really, really how my operating system may not be that way. I want to be that way. And things like this, they help. I mean, it's huge. Who would have ever guessed that we would have a victory like this at any point really, but especially in the middle of such chaos? It's awesome. One question I had just thinking about the Mountain Mamas, and you mentioned how the organization evolved over the years, and then how you said, and then we started doing a little more advocacy. But can you talk about that process? I mean, what did you have any experience doing that beforehand, or did you have to kind of learn on the fly and figure it out? I mean, I feel like that would be a big leap to go from the way the organization was at the beginning to all of a sudden like, all right, we're going to take control of this, and we're going to go and we're going to talk to these people, and we're going to make our voices heard. So what was that transition like, or what precipitated that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my, some of that was probably my pushing, and then a couple of other gals that still are involved in the Mountain Mamas. So my history is I've worked worked in PR and marketing for years for like various groovy Mountain West ad agencies and things like that. And then I figured out that I had a kind of a special skill, maybe not so much, that I can read some pretty technical policy and legislation. I can figure out how to talk to people about that in a way where it makes sense and where they find some commonality in it. And so that was really the spur. I saw these women coming together. And, again, there's a couple other gals that also worked in conservation or either professionally or volunteered with conservation. And they said, hey, it seems like this is a great opportunity to utilize these women to really allow them to take the next step with this passion for their outdoor quality of life and really make some change, really make that impact. And, I had been consulting for a lot of bigger national conservation orgs, and I love them. They're great. They are continuing to do good work. I just felt like, and I know a lot of other women shared some of those concerns, I just felt like I wasn't represented. And that was a big push for me. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of the other gals that, maybe like to fish, or maybe really like wilderness, or, like to hunt, or really like to play soccer, or really like to bird watch, or whatever. But they don't necessarily feel like they're represented, and that they don't necessarily feel like they're maybe even welcome. And so us being solely focused on women, and especially parents, moms, that really provided a safe and welcoming place for a lot of gals to go. And so that really kind of drove that. But it's challenging. It's I just got off the phone with a dear friend in Colorado, and he pointed out that I like legislation so much more than anyone else in the world does. And so and I understood that to a certain extent. But, I think at the end of the day, women just want to know that our voices matter. And there is so much power behind our voices that we just, I think, by and large, we just are not aware of. And it's really powerful and inspiring to see these women. And it just takes one act. I've noticed that, one letter to the editor, or one trip just to the local offices of our delegation members, just talking to them, giving them their story. And it's like the light turns on and they're like, what can I do next? That was awesome.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they've made that step to making their world a better place for their kids. And at the end of the day, you and I have talked about this in the past year. Your world changes when you have these tiny critters that you're responsible for, and you will do anything to protect them. You've probably been watching this, the Wall of Moms in Portland and
oh yeah.
and other bigger cities now, these gals with their bike helmets on and
mm-hmm.
backpacks, and they're linking arms and they are protecting protesters. And, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but I am so inspired by them going down there and protecting others. That's what we do. As parents, we're protectors. We make sure that our babies are safe and healthy and forever. It doesn't just end when they turn 18. And so that's been the most inspiring thing with the mamas, is there's not been one ask that I have given any of the gals that they said, oh, no, that's too hard. We'll figure it out, especially if it's something that directly impacts our kids.
No, I agree. Yeah. When we were talking about that the other day, I mean, it's a cliche that you hear a lot before you have kids, and this idea that everything shifts. And I didn't really take it seriously, but it does in a really big way. And I think in the end, a lot of it can be boiled down to, you don't care about yourself, anymore. You're not the number one priority in your head anymore. I mean, you obviously care about yourself, but number one are those kids, and then everything else falls in behind that. And so, if you don't mind, I think people would love to hear more about your journey as a mom, and kind of how that played out, and how that is really formed your life's work and this important work you're doing. Can you tell that story if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's very ironic now doing what I do. I never once have ever had those uterine twinges, never thought I would be a mom, never came across my mind as something I was going to do. So like I mentioned earlier, I climbed for a lot of years. I was really into mountaineering, really into ice climbing, really into skiing. Like that's what I thought I was supposed to do, and never good enough to actually make a living out of it. But I loved it. I grew up in Iowa in this big corn and soybean farm. And growing up, I would go to the high places. I would climb the silo. I'd climb the corn crib. I would go to the hills, top of the hills. I'd find these high places to sit, because I just have always felt like that's where the world makes sense. When I get low, it gets muddy. And so that's what I did. And then I kind of went through a lot of traumatic life changes. I got divorced. I had a really rough relationship with someone after my divorce. And then I suddenly was pregnant with with this tiny human. Mm-hmm. Truth be told, when I was pregnant, hated. And yeah, I was not a happy person. There's all those women that love it and they're walking around rubbing their bellies. That was not me. I passed out all the time. I was so uncomfortable. And and then I went through this horrific labor. It was 36 hours that ended up in an emergency C-section. And then this little bug popped out, just this perfect thing, and changed my life. And like you and I just, we've talked about it changes your life. And so, that really started me down this path of, it's not about me anymore. It's not about bagging this peak. It's not about going on this expedition. It's not about taking this trip. It's not about, whatever in my career. It's all about her. And it was this domino effect of everything in life. Then being a single mom, I was a single mom until I was probably 4 or 5. And that was crazy. Single parents out there, I am with you. If you need anything, you call me.
I don't understand how people do it. I mean, I had ultimate respect before COVID, but after being stuck at home, and having to, trade off with my wife to look after the kids. I mean, I honestly don't understand how it is done. I mean, it is amazing. It is purely amazing to me.
It is. And I only had one, and I don't know how the gals do it, and the guys that have more than one child. And, I was starting, I started 2 businesses and a nonprofit when I was a single mom. And I have no idea how I did that, other than it was just what I had to do. So I did it. And I do think that's the connection between the mountains and, all of us all over the world that find that connection between doing hard things, like suffering.
Yeah.
I knew I could do hard things in the mountains. I knew I could run a really long way. I knew I could climb really far. I knew I could not shower forever. I knew I could huff huge backpacks. And that started to translate into, I cannot sleep for a week. I can get through this stomach flu. I can do that. And that's how it started. And then you have this tiny thing that just changes your world. And through that, being a single mom, figuring out how to raise a child all on my own. I don't have any family close by to Montana here. It was a challenge, and it is way harder than any mountain I've ever climbed, any expedition I've ever been on, any race I've ever run. But so worth it. And that is really, again, what I see in these women time and time again. Like there's that great Eleanor Roosevelt quote, "You'll never know how strong a woman is unless you put her in hot water." That is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Eleanor Roosevelt, man, what a badass she is.
Coolest lady ever.
Yeah. And she had I'm obsessed with her uncle. But she had a rough childhood. Rough. Her dad, it's just a mess. And you talk about just a tough, smart, and her damn adult life wasn't easy either. And, man, I need to read more books about her. She's amazing. One question I want to follow up there. You said you started businesses because you had to, but I would think that you had a lot of choices other than to start business. I would think that a lot of people would just say, I just need a job. I just need money in the bank. I just need anything, whatever. I'll just go stand somewhere, and if they'll pay me to do it, I don't care. And you took it up multiple notches, because starting your own business is no joke under ideal circumstances. What was that? What drove you why was that your only choice to do that in your mind?
So if my sister is listening, Kristen, I'm so sorry. I love my sister. I have the best sister in the whole wide world, and she's fantastic. And the whole time she kept telling me, "You just need to get a job."
Yeah. It's understandable. That's solid advice.
Health benefits. You need a regular paycheck. You need to do this. And I understood where she was coming from. And, looking back on it now, and if God, hopefully my daughters will never experience that. But if they do, I will probably give them that same advice, because that's one thing that you don't have to worry about every day. I have never been one to take the easy path. And gosh, there's a gal here in town. She owns a spin cycling studio, and I've gotten to know her. And she said something to me once that finally made what I did made sense. She said that she started her business because she could not do it. Like, she had to. There was just something innate in her that said, I have to do this. And that's the other thing, my husband, and I joke around a lot about it. He is very cautious. He is an engineer. He is very scientific. He does all the math. He assesses all the risk. And I have never done that. I have always been the kind of gal that just runs full bore off a cliff and just assumes that it's going to be okay. And which is, again, I hope my babies don't do the same thing, because it's very stressful from the outside. And I understand why my sister was always terrified, but I just couldn't not do it. And, and what was making sense to me, which was being with my daughter and making enough money to adequately provide for both of us. And then what was really cropping up at that time as well was how I dealt with being a single mom, how I dealt with, tough relationships and adversity and just, trauma that life brings all of us, is I went on mountain bike rides. I kind of stopped mountaineering and climbing, but I went on mountain bike rides. I started doing ultra running. I still went on really long backcountry skis. Those were the places where I could reset, and I knew that the world would be okay. I could have had a terrible day at work. I could have failed. I fail all the time. But those experiences out in the woods taught me that if you just keep going, eventually you'll get there. And so I just continued to do that. And those businesses that I started, I still run them. I have a consulting business where we advocate and create communications plans and policy advising for legislation. I have a more traditional marketing firm that I started with a couple of gals that I used to work with. And we do really fun, creative work for for-profit enterprises. And then I have the Mountain Mamas, and the relationships that I've built through those, the impact that work from each of those businesses has had on my life and other people's lives has made it all worth it. But it certainly was not the easy route. It was not the safe path. Nothing about it was easy. But, at some point you got to risk it. And I am still, I've always been more into taking risks than shying away from them. And that is probably why I have failed more times than I've succeeded. But you never know what you can accomplish until you give it a go.
I think that's such great advice. And I wish I'd had more of that, when I was like 22 or something, because I feel like it took me a while to come around to that. But I mean, I better come around to it late than never. But one more question about your journey and your career. When you were, in the thick of it, single mom, starting these businesses, was it a love of storytelling that made you want to pursue these businesses, or was it wanting to control your own destiny and be your own boss and be in charge, or was it some combo of all that? I mean, what specifically gave you the drive to push through? Because I can't imagine it. I mean, I had my wife was out of town. I had both my girls, and I got the flu a while back. It was like the hardest damn thing I've ever done, ever, physically. And I've done some semi-hard things, and no question, the hardest thing I ever did. And I would have done anything at that point to make it easier. And I'm sure you had many, many, many examples of things much harder than that. And so, what specifically drove you to keep doing that work?
Oh, it's probably silly more than anything. Again, it's that that internal monologue that I think we all have, and mine is never, ever, ever give up. Yeah. Which times, probably is foolish. And I think sometimes there is a right time to change course and stop what you're doing and start something that seems like it will bring, more success to your life. For me, I just never got there. I kept seeing some success, and I kept seeing some wins, and I scraped by financially for a couple years until I got a lot more solid. And, but what I loved about, the Mamas and my other two businesses is not that I don't love guys. And it's so funny. I grew up a tomboy, went through college, always hanging out with guys because they wanted to climb and they wanted to ski and I wanted to do those things. But it wasn't until I had my daughter when I really, really found this intense and rich and lovely commonality with women. And because I work almost exclusively with women with all of my businesses. And that's really what has kept me going. I have just... Gosh, I can't say it enough. There are some women out there that will just blow your socks off with what they can accomplish. And, through that story too, I love story. I always joke around that I don't have any skills, but I can tell a story and I can listen to a story. And through that is just so much power. And again, through the, talking about what is advocacy, it's just telling your story. And if I can have a little part of that, I've I've been a success, even though I've failed way more than I've ever succeeded.
No, well, I think you look at anybody that's successful, and that they have failed many, many, many more times than they've been successful. I mean, I think that's a common theme, and I wouldn't sell yourself short on the storytelling, because I mean, that is what we do as humans. That's one of the few things we have going for us. We're not, if you look at us compared to all other animals, we're not very strong. We're smart, but we are storytelling animals. There's this book called Sapiens that I read a few years ago, and I mean, the guy just talks about that is what we do, and that is why we've been able to kind of separate ourselves from all the other animals over the course of millions of years, is because of our ability to tell stories, and that's what we respond to, and it's really a primal kind of thing. And so I think that's one of the most important things you can do ever. And you've proven that. I mean, you've been able to tell these stories to everybody from, mothers who may want to be involved, but can't, may not have the confidence or the know-how. And then to these senators, some of whom can be know-it-alls, and you're able to tell these stories that resonate. And that is a very important skill that I think everybody, I wish I was better at it.
No, I mean, I wish I was too. It's a great quote. I'm a big fan of Sally Jewell, and she came to Bozeman a number of years ago with one of our senators, Senator Tester, and spoke at the university here. And she had this great quote that I always think of, which is, she was asked a question about how do you influence, legislators and elected officials, and especially how do you influence them to prioritize conservation? And she very astutely said, how do you expect someone to advocate for something that they haven't been welcomed to? And I think about that all the time when we're talking about these stories. And, there's so many decision makers and elected officials that didn't grow up here in Bozeman or in Colorado or in Alaska or in New Mexico or in, any of these, really amazing mountain states. And so through our story, we can share those experiences with them. And then hopefully we'll get them to come over and go on a backpack trip or go on a horseback trip with us. But that's how we invite them. That's how we share our reality with them, is through story. And that's in turn, hopefully, how we'll influence them to prioritize our way of life.
Well, you talked about not feeling welcome. And I think that's a good segue into something we talked about when we were on the phone a few days ago, but about a lot of the leadership in conservation. Conservation is great, obviously. I mean, I've devoted my career to it, and a lot of this podcast is about it. It's obviously something I care about. But when you look at the leadership in conservation, more times than not, is a bunch of 60-year-old white dudes. And I'm getting closer. I mean, I'm a 40-year-old white dude. So I got nothing against middle-aged white dudes, but that makes a difference. Who is sitting in these positions of leadership, that sends out a message. And I always feel welcome because they look just like I do, or they look like I'm going to look in 20 years. But I think this current moment in history has caused all of us to re-examine that. And when we were talking the other day, you had some really cool insights about that. So, I mean, where do you see that going? These leadership, the people that are these groups that have been in charge for decades and decades. I mean, how do you see that playing out as we try to be more fair, more diverse, more inclusive across the whole conservation spectrum?
Well, I don't think they have a choice. And like I said earlier, that's the main reason why we started the Mamas, is because we needed representation. And I think I told you a story. I was sitting once, and I won't name who it was, a very large conservation organization meeting with some of their board members. And yes, it was me. And across the table was probably 8 or 9 of their board members. They were all over 50, most of them over 60. All of them were men, old white men. And they were lovely, don't get me wrong. But they asked me, how do we more efficiently talk to and encourage them to join our organization? How do we get more women? How do we get more people of color? How do we do that? And sometimes I say things before I've completely thought them through. And that happened that day. And I said, knee-jerk reaction, well, I would fire half of you. And with women and people of color. That's how. And I mean, you can't just in a silo say, I'm going to go start talking to African Americans and I'm just going to go start talking to Latinx and I'm just not, I'm going to start talking to LGBTQ. You have to welcome those people in. They have to be a part of your organization. It can't just be a tangent or a subset or a box that you check with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I only see that changing. And, there's been so many good things that have come out of the Me Too movement, from the George Floyd protests that we can't turn our backs on anymore. And we can't ignore. And I feel like in some ways the conservation community has ignored it. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I think in this day and age, we're not going to be able to turn away anymore, or we're not going to survive. And so I would go back to my knee-jerk reaction and say, if you want to talk to those people need to be you. And the more that we can get people of diversity, women, people, just not old white men in the conservation world, in the community, at the table, the more, I think, more effective we'll be in general, but the more welcoming we will be. And the more welcoming, again, getting back to that Sally Jewell quote, we've got to make these places safe. We have to make them welcoming because they are for everyone. They are not just for the white elite. And that is what we're certainly passionate about, that at the Mamas. And the more women that I meet with, that I talk to, that we can say, hey, you can do this. You can sit on this board. You can get this job. There's, and this is terrible of me to say, but there's a great social media meme that flew around last week or the week before that said something like, if Kanye West can run for president and think that he is experienced and, great at that job, all of the women should be applying for all of the jobs all of the time.
I agree with that.
I agree with that. Yes. So, it just sometimes it takes a little nudge, and it takes us getting out of our traditional, kind of old white man world that we've operated in conservation for years. And, more often than not, when I go to a meeting with a bunch of different folks, depending on whether it's legislation or organizational meeting or something like that, I would say 9 times out of 10, I am in the minority. There's usually more dudes around that table than there are women, and certainly hardly any people of diversity. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think we can do it.
I agree. And I think we're on the road. I mean, I think this moment we're in is forcing everybody to take a good hard look at the reality of things. And I mean, I'm just as guilty as anybody of just having my blinders on and having my blind spots and just kind of bumbling along, not paying attention. And, we don't really have a choice. Things are going to change, and things are changing. So you might as well, lean in, and because there's a lot of great opportunities here, I think. So
many opportunities. And I think that's just if we can, let's look at it in that way. There's so many more opportunities, the more inclusive that we are as a conservation community. Think about, all the more decision makers that will influence, and all the more people that will get out on our public lands and waters every year. And, so many people in Montana, especially, hate when the fishing access sites are busy, or when the trailhead parking lots are full. And I get excited when they're full, because I'm like, yes, look at all these people out there enjoying our public lands, because that's what they're for. And if they have those great experiences in those places, we might be able to rely on them to advocate for them. And that's a win in my book.
You mentioned Sally Jewell. You mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt. I was wondering what other heroes you have. Are there any others? Either, it could be family, could be people you read about. Are there people you've admired, or people you've worked with, people you admire that have kind of helped shape your outlook on personal and professional life?
Yeah, you'll probably think this is funny too. Winnie the Pooh is
better than Eeyore. Eeyore's my enemy.
Oh, Eeyore, he's lovable too. But no, I have so many pooisms in my head, usually at all times during the day. And
What's a good one?
my favorite is when he says, "You can't stand in your corner of the forest and expect people to come to you. Sometimes you have to go to them too."
That's a good one.
I love poo. So I would say that.
No, that's great. That's good stuff. I read a lot of Winnie the Pooh.
You should read more. I have, well, with your kids, you'll be doing more of that. I would, so many of my heroes are from children's books. Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. I feel, she's just the most selfless creature you could ever imagine. She epitomizes empathy and selflessness. And I could read that book till the cows come home. It's so good. And I'd probably say my sister. I mentioned her before. She is a force. She is like a weather pattern, and she is so incredibly tough. She has a crazy, huge, worldwide job, and yet she balances her children and her husband and her family. That priority trumps everything else in her life, and she's pretty darn dreamy. So I would say those three for sure.
So speaking, you mentioned a few books, and we just finished Charlotte's Web around here, and man, that's a good book. What other books have played a big role in your life? Do you have any? And I normally ask people, like, what's your favorite book about the American West? If one comes to mind, that's great. But otherwise, just what are some important books that you would recommend other people read?
So I was an English literature major in college, and so I have a very soft spot for the classics. And I adore John Steinbeck. This is probably trite, but I do read Travels with Charlie every single year. And
that's awesome. That's not trite at all. I just read it. It's really cool.
Oh, it's so good. It is so good. I love how he travels across America, making connections, again, telling story with people. I love it. And of course, I love how he talks about Montana in that book. And I would probably say East of Eden is another favorite. Is very long. And I was living and climbing in New Zealand for a while. And all you climbers out there know that whatever you can do to make your backpack lighter, you do it. And but always get these like big eyes. I would show up at one of the Alpine huts there, and I'd pull out my East of Eden copy and read another, couple hundred pages, and they'd be like, "Really? You brought that book all the way?"
That's commitment.
But it's good. I definitely put that on my list. And then I do a ton of reading with my girls. We are readers. We are voracious readers around here. And there is a book that I just had to look up because I couldn't remember the name of it. It's called Some Kind of Courage, and it's by Dan Gamenhart. I would recommend that to anybody who loves the West. It's just, it's wonderful. It's about this young man, 13-year-old kid during late 1800s who lost his entire family, and he has goes on this crazy journey because he is so very devoted to a horse that's been unjustly sold out from under him, and his father passed, and he has all these crazy journeys and experiences and adventures, and he has such a strong moral compass, and everything he does reflects that. So that it's so good. I can't tell you enough wonderful things about it. So if you want a quick, easy read with your kids, read that. That's perfect. I'll put links to all those so people can click through. Those are great. Do you have time? I doubt it with everything you have going on, but do you ever have time to sit back and watch a movie or a film? And if so, are there any good ones you'd recommend? So funny, you and I talked earlier. So my favorite documentary, I don't even know if you can call it a documentary, but it is How to Run 100 Miles by Brendan Leonard. It's so good. It's so good. And Brendan was on the podcast. People can I'll put a link. He is such a good dude, and that film is awesome. I love it. I watch it probably once a month for a variety of reasons. I mentioned I feel like I have a lot of kinships with him. We both grew up in Iowa, both obviously love the mountains, live in the mountains now, but funny, my husband watched that film. I'd made him watch it once, and then he promptly signed up for Run Rabbit Run after not being a lifelong non-runner. He had run a half marathon with me about 10 months before the Run Rabbit, and he did the 100-miler last year. Brent,
That is so crazy. That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard, and most awesome thing at the same time. I mean, because we talked about this the other day. I've done that race, and it is no joke. It's and it's like 107 miles, really, 103, 107 with 20,000 feet of vertical, and he had never done more than a half marathon.
Not more than a half marathon, and hates running, like hates it, like absolutely hates it. But he he is stubborn, and if he puts his mind to something, he is going to do it. And I think really at the end of the day, what he got out of that experience was just what happens to your body, like not just your body, but your mind through those 100. And yes, it is more than 100 miles. He has told me that many times. But so if you haven't watched that movie by Brendan, watch it. There's just so many different wonderful stories and connections that movie brings about that are way bigger than running.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I'll link to that. It's probably maybe 20, 25 minutes long, and definitely worth a watch. I absolutely loved it. I told him, and it's true. It's the best movie about running I've ever watched, and I've watched a lot of them. So kind of last question, thinking about who listens to this podcast, and I mean, you get it. You get what I'm trying to do here. I mean, people that love the West in one way or the other, whether it's through conservation, like you're doing, through athletics, art, long list, but people that love the West and feel a connection to this place. Do you have any parting words of wisdom or something you would ask those people to do? Any words you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would say the most important thing any of us can do is to find commonality with our neighbor and to never give up. I know I've said that's kind of my internal monologue always, and it just applies to so many different parts of life. And don't be afraid of failure. And I think that kind of, runs hand in hand with not giving up. I fail every day so many times, and there's so much knowledge to be gained through that failure, and opportunity for growth and success down the road. And, as we watch our nation, our world change, we are so very lucky to live here in the Mountain West and have this quality of life that we do. And all of our voices matter, and it doesn't always happen right away. But if you keep with something, whatever is important to you, whatever is important to your family and your community, make your voice heard. Your voice is power, and don't give up.
I love it. That's inspiring stuff. And I really appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk with me. This is a great conversation, and it's timely for a lot of different reasons. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thank
you. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I am in very large company. So I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie, and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountaineprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.